The shrill sound of a whistle slices through the air, echoing in the near-empty gymnasium. It tears through the steady rhythm of bouncing basketballs, the squeak of sneakers on polished hardwood, the murmur of panting athletes. For a moment, everything stops. The ensuing silence is heavier than any noise. Rafael Yun Costas feels this silence as a physical pressure, a weight on his shoulders. He's standing near the bench, a clipboard pressed to his chest like a shield. In his hand, a black pen. On the clipboard, a tangle of lines, arrows, and circles that to anyone else would look like meaningless scribbles. To Rafael, it was the clearest language in the world. The coach, Pierre Wilson, a man whose presence seemed to occupy all the oxygen in the room, strides towards him. His steps are heavy, deliberate. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice is a contained thunderclap, but anger leaks from the edges. Rafael doesn't respond. He lifts his gaze but can't focus it on the coach's face. The gym lights are too bright. The sounds are coming back in waves and the coach's question spins in his mind, unable to find an answer that can be put into words. "I asked you a question, kid. We're in here sweating, trying to fix our defense, and you're out here drawing?" The contempt in the word drawing hits Rafael like a punch. He just tightens his grip on the clipboard. It's all he can do. It's his universe, his voice. Right there on the page, Pierre Wilson snatches the clipboard from his hands. He glances at the diagram for a second, a look of disbelief and fury solidifying on his face. "Get out," he says, the word falling like a guillotine into the silence. "Pack your things and get out of my gym. I don't want artists here. I want players. Before you go, tell me quickly where you're watching this story from. It's incredible to see how far these messages reach. And if you don't want to miss the outcome of journeys like Rafael's, subscribe now, because what happens next is proof that the real game doesn't always happen on the court." Ever since Rafael was little, the world for him seemed like a radio tuned between two stations. There was the static noise from the outside, the overlapping conversations, the bright lights, the unspoken expectations that seemed to scream at him, and there was the clear, perfect melody that played inside his head. "My name is Maria Bacher, and I am Rafael's mother. For years, my main job was to try and build a bridge between these two worlds for my son. When he was diagnosed with autism at age 4, the doctor used a lot of technical words: social communication deficit, restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior. But what I saw wasn't a deficit. It was a different language. Where other children used words to ask for a toy, Rafael arranged his blocks in perfect patterns, creating a silent order that calmed him. Where others cried in frustration, he swayed gently, a rhythm only he understood, to find his center again. Finding a place for him in this noisy world was our great challenge. School was a sensory minefield. His peers were a code he couldn't decipher, and teachers most of the time saw his quietness as disinterest and his need for routine as stubbornness. We tried everything. Swimming, but the feeling of cold water and the echo of screams in the pool overwhelmed him. Music lessons, but the obligation to follow someone else's sheet music felt like imprisonment. It was by chance that we discovered basketball, not the game itself. Rafael never showed interest in shooting the ball or running back and forth. What captivated him was what happened between the movements. He was watching a game on television, with the volume muted, and I saw him lean forward, his eyes fixed on the screen. He wasn't following the ball. He was following the players. He saw the geometry, the choreographed dance of the plays, the spaces that opened and closed like a living organism. For him, basketball wasn't a sport of strength but of patterns. Soon our shopping lists and napkins filled with diagrams. They were intricate lines, arrows indicating future movements, circles representing defensive zones. He didn't draw players, he drew the movement itself. It was his way of translating the melody he heard in his head into something the world could, perhaps one day, see. He spent hours studying old games, mapping the strategies of great coaches. He could predict plays before they happened, identifying the smallest shifts in a player's stance that signaled intent. His notebooks became a library of tactics, a silent encyclopedia of the game. When the opportunity for a summer internship with the city's professional team arose, it felt like a door opening. It was a humble position, equipment assistant, but for Rafael, it was paradise. It was a chance to be close to the source of his passion, to watch the patterns unfold live. I was terrified, of course. The world of professional sports is loud, aggressive, and impatient. It's everything that overwhelms my son. But the joy in his eyes when he told me was so pure, I couldn't say no. I helped him prepare, rehearsing possible conversations, reminding him to make eye contact, even for a second. But the one thing he really wanted to bring was his clipboard and a pen. "They might need ideas, Mom," he told me, in one of his rare, complete, spontaneous sentences. And my heart broke a little, because I knew how unlikely it was that anyone in that world of giant egos would stop to listen to the quiet ideas of a boy who spoke through lines and arrows. But I smiled and said, "Of course they will, my love. Your ideas are brilliant." I prayed that for once, someone other than me would learn to read his language. The first few weeks were a mixture of quiet euphoria and invisibility. Raphael was punctual, efficient, and almost ghostly. He filled water bottles, organized towels, and positioned training cones with a geometric precision that went unnoticed by everyone. To the players and the coaching staff, he was just part of the scenery, a quiet kid doing his job. But for Raphael, it was total immersion. He was breathing the same air as his heroes, watching from yards away the patterns he had only seen on screen. And true to his nature, he began to document everything. His clipboard was his extension. During practices, as players ran and Coach Pierre Wilson barked orders, Raphael watched. He didn't just see a bad pass. He saw the spacing breakdown that led to the bad pass. He didn't just see a missed shot. He saw the slow defensive rotation that allowed the contested shot. And he drew. He drew solutions. Lines that showed a better path for the ball, arrows indicating a smarter cut to the basket, shading representing a more effective defensive coverage. He wasn't getting distracted. He was more engaged than anyone there. This was his way of participating. Hope began to sprout in me, and in him too, I think. He came home with a sparkle in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. He didn't talk much about his day, but he'd show me his new notes, his new diagrams. They were increasingly complex, more sophisticated. He was learning, growing. False hope materialized in the form of Leon Miller, one of the younger assistant coaches. Leon was different from Wilson. He was more observant, more analytical. A few times I knew from Raphael, Leon would glance over his shoulder with genuine curiosity. He wouldn't say anything, but he also wouldn't dismiss him. Once Raphael dropped one of his sheets. Leon picked it up, and before handing it back, his eyes scanned the diagram for a few seconds. He furrowed his brow, not with contempt, but with concentration, as if trying to solve a puzzle. That small moment was everything to Raphael, the possibility of being seen. But the world of professional basketball revolves around its son, and the son of that team was Pierre Wilson. Wilson was an old-school coach, a man forged in the belief that success came from sweat, discipline, and blind obedience. He valued verbal communication, the shout, the audible energy. Raphael's silence and devotion to his clipboard irritated him deeply. To Wilson, a coach's clipboard was a symbol of authority, and seeing the equipment kid with one constantly scribbling was an affront. The comments started subtly. "We have a future artist among us," he'd say loudly for all to hear with a sneer. "Hey Picasso, bring the water here." Raphael didn't react. He didn't understand the sarcasm. He simply heard the literal command, "Bring the water," and complied. This lack of reaction only angered Wilson more. He saw it as a challenge, as stubbornness. Pressure on the team was mounting. They had lost 3 games in a row, and the media was starting to question Wilson's leadership. The tension in the gym was palpable. Practices became longer, more intense. Wilson's patience, already thin, evaporated completely. He started seeing Raphael's silent presence as a bad omen, a personification of the lack of focus he believed was infecting his team. Raphael's false hope, fueled by Leon Miller's curious glance, was about to collide with Pierre Wilson's wall of frustration and misunderstanding. That environment, which once felt like a sanctuary, was becoming a place of anxiety. Raphael kept drawing because it was the only thing he knew how to do. In his world, when you see a problem, you draw the solution. He couldn't understand why. To everyone else, it seemed like the wrong thing to do. The day everything fell apart began like any other. The smell of disinfectant and sweat hung in the air. The rhythmic thud of basketballs was the pulse of the place. But the energy was different. It was the eve of a crucial game against their biggest rivals, a team known for an almost impenetrable zone defense that had been frustrating the league's best offenses. Practice was focused on trying to find a way to break this defense. Pierre Wilson was more on edge than ever. His face was a mask of frustration, his voice a hoarse bark as he guided players through plays that repeatedly failed against the scout team simulating the opposing defense. Passes were telegraphed. Players hesitated. The offense stagnated. The frustration in the gym was so thick you could cut it with a knife. From his spot near the bench, Raphael watched. He didn't just see the frustration, he saw the cause. The opposing defense wasn't just disciplined. It was based on anticipation and angles. They didn't react to the offense, they guided it into traps, and Wilson's team was falling into every single one. In his mind, the melody began to play. He saw a solution. It wasn't a single play, but a sequence of movements, a flow. It started with an overload on one side of the court to draw the defense, followed by a quick cut by a player on the opposite side through a series of sequential screens. It was complex, counterintuitive, but in his mind, it was perfect. His pen began to move feverishly across the clipboard. He was no longer in the gym. He was inside the diagram. He drew the passing lane, the arc of the player's movement, the angles of the screens. He forgot about the water bottles, the towels, everything. He was solving the puzzle. It was at this moment that Mateo Jackson, the team captain, called for a timeout for water. He turned towards the bench and saw no one. "Water!" he yelled, out of breath. The shout didn't penetrate Raphael's bubble of concentration. It was Wilson's voice that did. "Costas!" The name boomed through the gym. Raphael looked up, blinking, as if waking from a dream. He saw Wilson marching towards him, his face flushed with rage. The conflict wasn't about basketball, not anymore. It was about authority, about colliding worlds. Wilson wasn't a bad man. He was a man under immense pressure, a man who believed in one way of doing things. In his worldview, effort had a specific look. Sweat, shouts, physical movement. Raphael's quiet, intense focus looked like the opposite of that. It looked like laziness, disrespect. "What are you doing?" Wilson snarled, stopping in front of Raphael. "Mateo asked for water 5 minutes ago. The whole team is waiting. And you're in here, in your little world, scribbling." He snatched the clipboard from Raphael's hands. He looked at the diagram. To the untrained eye in Raphael's language, it was a chaos of lines and arrows. It didn't look like the clean, ordered diagrams in playbooks. It was organic, fluid, almost alive. Wilson saw only proof of his theory. The kid was completely disengaged. "This," he said, shaking the clipboard in the air. "This is what's more important than your job? Than this team?" Raphael opened his mouth to try and explain. "It's for their zone, the movement," but the words wouldn't come out right. Under Wilson's furious gaze and the attention of the entire team, his verbal bridge crumbled. "That's it," Wilson yelled, throwing the clipboard to the floor. The pages scattered. "I can't have this distraction here. I can't have someone who isn't committed. Pack your things. Get out. Now." The command was final. Raphael froze for a second, the noise in his head becoming deafening. The players' gazes varied. Some looked embarrassed. Others, relieved that the coach's anger had found a target other than them. Mateo Jackson looked confused, but no one said a word. Silently, Raphael knelt to gather his scattered pages, but his hands trembled. He picked up only a few. He left the clipboard and the rest of the papers behind. He walked out of the gym, feeling dozens of eyes on his back. He didn't look back. The door clicked shut behind him, and the sound of practice resumed, leaving him outside in the silence of a world that once again had no room for his melody. When Raphael arrived home, he was a shell. The light in his eyes was extinguished. He didn't say a word, just went to his room and closed the door. I heard him drag his chair, and then silence. A silence I knew all too well. It was the silence of overload, of retreat. He was shutting down to protect himself. My mother's heart filled with impotent fury. I wanted to call the team manager, the owner, the press. I wanted to scream at that ignorant coach who had crushed my son's spirit. but I knew it would only embarrass him further. So I took a deep breath and did what I always did. I gave him space and I waited. The turnaround, when it came, wasn't a thunderclap, but a whisper. It happened far from us in the same gym from which my son had been ejected. After Raphael left, practice continued, but the energy had dissipated. The public humiliation left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth. The zone defense continued to frustrate them. At the end of the day, as the janitors cleaned the court, Leon Miller walked past the bench. He saw the abandoned clipboard and the scattered sheets. Something made him stop. He remembered Raphael's focused gaze, the way his pen flew across the paper. He knelt down and gathered the papers. He sat on the empty bench and began to look at the diagram that had cost Raphael his job. At first, it was confusing as Wilson had seen it, but Leon had a different mind. He was of the new generation of coaches, who grew up with advanced analytics and saw the game as a mathematical problem. He started tracing the lines, not as scribbles, but as pathways. He noticed small symbols that Raphael used to lower, indicate a player's eye direction, something he had never seen before. Slowly, like deciphering an ancient code, the chaos began to make sense. He realized it wasn't a play. It was many, interconnected, options that branched out depending on the defense's reaction. It was an offensive philosophy, encapsulated on a single page, and it was brilliant. The centerpiece was the play Raphael was drawing when he was interrupted. Leon traced it mentally: the overload, the sequential screens, the cut to the weak side. It was such an elegant solution, so perfect for the problem they faced that Leon felt a shiver. That quiet kid wasn't distracted. He had solved the riddle that an experienced NBA coach and his entire staff couldn't. Leon sat there for nearly an hour in the silent gym, the clipboard in his lap. He felt ashamed for not saying anything, for not defending Raphael, but the shame was quickly replaced by a sense of urgency. This was too important to ignore. He knew going directly to Wilson would be professional suicide. The coach's ego was bruised, and he would never admit his mistake so easily. Leon needed an ally. He took a photo of the diagram with his phone and went home. The next morning, he didn't go to the coach's office. He went to find Mateo Jackson, the captain. He found Mateo in the weight room, the frustration of the previous day still evident on his face. "Mateo, I need to show you something," Leon said, his voice low. "But you have to come with an open mind." Skeptical, Mateo followed him to a small auxiliary practice court. Leon grabbed a whiteboard and redrew Raphael's play, simplifying it to make it clearer. "What's this?" Mateo asked. "It's an idea I had," Leon lied, "for now. I think it can work against their zone." They ran the play. Mateo, as one of the smartest players in the league, saw its genius immediately. "Where'd you get this, Leon?" "This isn't your style." Leon hesitated, then decided to tell the truth. "It's not mine, it's Raphael's. The kid Wilson kicked out yesterday." Mateo went silent for a long moment. He remembered Raphael's face, the way he flinched. He remembered the contempt in the coach's voice. And now he was looking at proof that they had all been wrong. The silent turnaround wasn't a single moment, but a series of them. It was Leon choosing curiosity over judgment. It was Mateo choosing truth over blind loyalty. It was the genius of a silent diagram speaking louder than any shout in the gym. The seed of change had been planted. The first small victory was winning over Mateo Jackson. With the team captain on board, the idea gained weight, but they still needed to convince the authority. Leon's next step was audacious. He scheduled a meeting with Olivia Torres, the team's general manager. Olivia was known for being innovative and data-driven, the opposite of Pierre Wilson's old-school intuition. In her office, Leon didn't talk about Raphael's unfair treatment. He spoke the only language that matters in professional sports: results. He showed her Raphael's diagram and the recording of Mateo and a few other players testing the play secretly that morning. He explained the logic behind it, how it exploited the fundamental principles of the opposing defense. Olivia Torres listened intently, her eyes moving between Leon's analysis and the complexity of Raphael's original drawing. She didn't see a scribble. She saw innovation. "Whose is this?" she asked. "Rafael Yun Costas, the intern coach Wilson. Dismissed yesterday." Olivia's expression didn't change, but Leon felt a shift in the room's atmosphere. "Leave this with me, Leon," she said. That was the second small victory. The power was now aware. Meanwhile, at home, the victory was much smaller, but to me, monumental. After a day of absolute silence, Raphael finally emerged from his room. He didn't speak, but he sat down at the kitchen table and started drawing on a napkin. It was new plays, new ideas. He hadn't been broken. His passion was stronger than the humiliation. To me, seeing him with a pen in his hand again was like watching a bird, thought to have a broken wing, try to fly again. It was a victory of spirit. On game day, the tension was unbearable. Olivia Torres had a closed-door conversation with Pierre Wilson. No one knew what was said, but when Wilson emerged from her office, his face was grim. He didn't mention Raphael or the play. The official game plan remained the same. It was as if Leon and Olivia's intervention had never happened. The game started, and it was a disaster. The opposing defense suffocated them. By halftime, they were down by 15 points. The crowd was restless, the team demoralized. In the locker room, the silence was funereal. Wilson yelled, gestured, but his words felt hollow. No one believed them anymore. It was then that Mateo Jackson stood up. All eyes turned to him. "Coach," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't working. We have another option." Pierre Wilson looked at him, his pride wounded etched on his face. "And what would that be, Captain? Some genius idea you've been holding back?" "It's not mine," Mateo said. He looked at Leon Miller, who stepped forward. "It's Raphael's play. The play from that clipboard. We've practiced it, it works." The locker room fell so silent you could hear a pin drop. Raphael's name hung in the air, a silent accusation. Wilson looked from Mateo to Leon, then to the faces of the other players. He saw the doubt in their eyes replaced by a flicker of hope. He was cornered. His authority, his methods, everything was failing. He could cling to his pride and go down with the ship, or he could swallow his pride and grasp a lifeline drawn by a kid he had humiliated. It was the hardest battle of his career, fought not on the court but within his own mind. He looked at the tactical board, at his own crossed-out, ineffective plays. After an eternity, he picked up a marker and handed it to Leon. "Show me," he said, his voice barely audible. That word, "show me," was the most important small victory of all. It was the sound of a mind beginning, reluctantly, to open. The second half of the game was a slow, arduous climb. They didn't start using Raphael's play immediately. Wilson introduced it in bits and pieces, mixing it with their regular offense. It was like testing the waters. Each time they used it, it worked. An easy pass here, an open shot there. The opposing defense got confused, their rotations a step. Slow. Confidence began to return to the team. Players moved with more fluidity, more purpose. The point deficit started to shrink. 12, 8, 5. At home, Raphael and I watched the game. He sat on the edge of the sofa, utterly still, but I could feel his mind working, analyzing every possession. Suddenly, he leaned forward. "They're doing it," he whispered. I didn't understand at first. "Doing what, honey?" "The movement. My movement." He pointed at the screen. I saw the overload, the screen, the cut. It was like watching his drawings come to life. His eyes, which had been dull for days, shone with an intensity that took my breath away. He didn't look happy or vindictive. He looked understood. It was the validation he had never asked for, but desperately needed. The most profound transformation was happening in Pierre Wilson. With every time the play worked, a piece of his rigidity chipped away. He began to look at Leon Miller before calling a play, a silent acknowledgement that there was wisdom in the locker room that wasn't his own. He was, perhaps for the first time in decades, learning. He was shifting from a dictator to a conductor, trusting the music someone else had written. The game reached its climax in the final seconds. They were down by 1 point. They had possession. 14 seconds on the clock. Wilson called a timeout. Cameras focused on the bench, the whole world watching. Wilson didn't grab his clipboard. He looked at Mateo, at Leon, and at the rest of the team. "You know what to do," he said. "Run the play. Raphael's play." He had named it. He had claimed it not for himself, but for its author. It was an act of public acknowledgement. In that moment, Wilson ceased to be the villain of the story. He became human. A flawed, proud man, but one capable of change. True acceptance isn't erasing the mistake, but acknowledging it and learning from it. As the team returned to the court, I held Raphael's hand. He didn't pull away. His attention was entirely on the screen. The play began. It was the full version of the diagram, a symphony of movement. The commentators were baffled. The defense was pulled to one side, exactly as Raphael had drawn. Mateo Jackson made the cut on the opposite side, wide open. The pass was perfect. The shot was pure. The ball swished through the net just as the buzzer sounded. The arena erupted. Players embraced. Wilson threw his arms up, not in selfish triumph, but in relief and, perhaps, awe. In our living room, Raphael didn't jump or cheer. He simply leaned back on the sofa and let out a long, slow sigh. It was the sound of a weight being lifted from his shoulders. He looked at me and gave a small smile. In that smile, I saw everything: the pain of rejection, the joy of validation, and the peace of finally having his language understood. The victory in the game was important, but the victory in our living room was the one that truly mattered. The pain of being misunderstood doesn't disappear with a single victory. The scars of exclusion take time to heal. The day after the game, the city was in a frenzy. Sports shows analyzed the mystery play that won the game. Pierre Wilson's name was everywhere, lauded for his tactical genius in the second half. Raphael's name wasn't mentioned anywhere, and that was okay. Raphael's victory was never about public recognition. It was about solving the problem, about the beauty of the pattern. But justice sometimes finds its way. That afternoon, there was a knock at our door. When I opened it, I saw Pierre Wilson standing on our porch. He looked smaller and older, without the furious energy of the gym. He held a basketball. "Mrs. Bacher," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "May I speak with Raphael?" I hesitated, protective, but Raphael appeared behind me, curious. Wilson looked at my son, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't anger or impatience. It was respect. "Raphael," he began, "there's been a lot of talk about the play last night, about how I came up with it at halftime." He paused. "But that's not true. The play was yours. The win was yours." He extended the basketball. It was covered in signatures. "The guys wanted you to have this. They're calling the play Costas. We're calling it Costas." Raphael took the ball, his fingers tracing the signatures. He didn't say anything, but his eyes were fixed on Wilson. "I was an idiot, Raphael," Wilson continued. "I see effort in a certain way. Sweat, noise. I didn't know how to see the effort that happens in silence. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." That apology, direct and unvarnished, was more powerful than any trophy. Wilson then looked at Raphael and made an offer that would change everything. "I don't want you to be an equipment assistant. That was a mistake. I want you to work with me, with the coaching staff. I need someone who sees the game the way you do. I need you to teach me to read your language." Raphael looked at his room, at his stacked notebooks, and then back at Wilson. He gave a single firm nod, and that was enough. The pain won't vanish completely. There will be other days when the world is too loud, too confusing. There will be people who don't have the patience or wisdom of Pierre Wilson to admit their mistakes. But now Raphael had a new, powerful tool. Proof that his voice, however quiet, has value. He learned that he doesn't need to change who he is to fit into the world. Sometimes, it's the world that needs to learn, to make room for new languages, new ways of seeing. Hope isn't in a future without challenges, but in the certainty that we have the resilience to face them. Raphael's true victory wasn't the last-second basket. It was the moment an old-school coach learned to see a diagram not as a scribble, but as a map to the future. And it was the moment my son realized that the melody in his head wasn't something to hide, but a song worth sharing. The gymnasium is now his place, not in spite of who he is, but because of who he is. And his clipboard is no longer a sign of distraction, but a symbol of his strength. Talent doesn't always shout for attention. Sometimes it whispers in silent diagrams, in patterns that only patient eyes can see. Raphael's story reminds us that the greatest mistake we can make is confusing a different language for a lack of something to say. The world is full of unique melodies, just waiting for someone willing to learn to hear them. If this story touched you in any way, please like it. Comment what you felt and subscribe to the channel. Everyone's journey is unique, but the need to be understood is universal. Someone you know might need to hear this today.